on for whatever crazy thing that could ever happen. That's something that you do not need, and that's what makes sports betting fun, and that's what makes you able to lose some of those bets to win in the long run. So
I will never stop preaching discipline. I get people all the time on Twitter and Facebook and elsewhere trying to bait me into violating my rule of discipline. Oh, well, if you're so good, who's going to win this game or that game? And my response is, I didn't handicap the game, or I chose to pass. Like, for instance, Boise State versus Florida State. Really interesting game. I'm very interested to watch it, but I advise people to pass on the game. And the reason why is because Florida State is completely overhauling their program, so you have no idea what you're going to get with Taggart's team there. And Boise State's going to have a brand new quarterback, so you don't really know what you're going to get there. And they have a lot of question marks at other spots. And so Boise State people who weren't happy with my power ratings, which are accurate, but they don't like the fact that they're accurate, are constantly baiting me saying, all right, well, what's your pick for Boise State versus Florida State? My answer is pass. That's the right decision. The right decision is pass on the game because there's too many risks. Wait for a better opportunity. There's always going to be another opportunity. You don't need to bet on games simply because there's a line available.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And people sometimes get stuck in that whole addiction part of it because they're end up losing, and then they end up, putting a bunch of money on a game that they shouldn't even be betting because it was a very sharp NFL Sunday night game. The lines were sharp on it, and people end up flipping another coin for no reason that could really give them a bad week. There's no way you should be doing that. You should have the games that you already plan on playing and go from week to week. So the discipline I can completely 100% agree with. And to be disciplined, you have to either put the time into it or go to somebody that does, And so I completely agree with you 100%. Well, that's awesome, man. Now, when you kind of touched on this a little bit, you got all this information in your head from all the research, right? Mm-hmm. What made you just decide to write it in a book? Is this something that, you just felt you needed to share with everybody? You just wanted to completely get it off your chest? What made you decide to?
This is another answer that's going to surprise a lot of people. A lot of people accuse me of trying to peddle books to make money, and I'll be honest with you, the commissions not the commissions, but the royalties are nice, but they're not anywhere near what I can make as a CPA. I mean, I make it to the point where I'm billing out $500 an hour for tax shelters, right? Mm-hmm. So the book royalties are not the issue. I published the book because I wanted to be the guy who revolutionized sports betting and changed the public perception. There is a ton of misinformation and disinformation being disseminated about sports betting, and a lot of it's being disseminated by mass media, that most of the people that claim to be experts in sports betting are really just entertainers. They really don't know what they're talking about. Right. There's a lot of people who are disseminating information that's just downright wrong. And there's a massive misconception about a person's ability to win in sports betting. Everybody keeps saying, oh, well, the house always wins. Well, that's not how sports betting works. It's not like a table game where the house has a built-in edge. That's a complete misunderstanding of how sports betting works. That's not how a sports book can lose money if they fail to balance their action. In fact, they lost money on the last Super Bowl because they failed to balance their action. And a sports book can actually lose money for an entire year based on the Super Bowl alone because the handle is so high. And I've even bickered back and forth with sportsbook managers because they don't like me revealing this information. They want the general public to remain ignorant. And so I'm sharing this information, and might as well get into probably what the most important thing out there is, that I think the number one mistake that people make, and I made this mistake myself when I first started in sports betting, is that ATS records and trends are totally worthless. And I can go into the explanation if you have enough time. But basically, you walk into the sports books and you see those legal-sized pieces of paper, and on the back of them is ATS records published by a particular company. I'm not going to say anything negative about the company, but I think everyone knows who they are. And there's other people out there that are publishing the ATS records, and they have zero value. And the reason why they have zero value is because they're generally based on consensus lines, which is also known as the Vegas line, which doesn't exist. It's just intellectually lazy to even say that. If I walk up to the counter at the MGM and I say, hey, man, I want to bet the Vegas line, the ticket writer is going to look at me and laugh. Because you can't do it. You have to bet the MGM line. Right. So right from the start, these ATS records and trends that everybody's publishing are based on lines that you can't even bet. And then even if they were based on specific lines from a specific sports book, you still have the issue of, well, is it based on the opening line, the high line, the closing line? The lines move from opening to closing. So it's this constantly moving measuring point, which makes ATS records and trends have no value. As the lines that you bet when you go to place your bet, which goes in conjunction with line shopping, are different than whatever those ATS trends were based on. And so therefore they're not of any value to you.
Exactly. And sometimes those closing lines factor in Vegas having to be farther on the other side of what they would set the line up just to balance the book. And
I know there was a guy that he's a pretty well-known EV guy, the guys with the math models out there. He started bickering with me on Twitter saying, "Oh, what do you mean there is no Vegas line, no shared line?" And I say, well, it's 100% correct to say that there is no Vegas line. However, a further explanation is required, that it is in the best interest of all the sports books to have their lines as close together as possible, because one outlier can cause a ripple effect through the entire system. If one book decides to push a number out by a point, everybody's going to run to that book. And then every other book's got to respond, and it creates this domino effect. So it's in the best interest of all the sports books to have their lines relatively close. However, you can lose a bet based on a half point. So I could bet at the MGM and win because they had a half-point line different than Caesars. So I could bet at MGM and win, and my friend could bet at Caesars and lose, but we bet the same game. I won because I had a half-point different line at MGM compared to Caesars. So now does the team have an ATS record of 1-0 or 0-1? Well, it depends on what measurement point, what set of data you use. And so I've tried as good as I can, and there's a very lengthy explanation in my book. I think it's in chapter 1. It's actually in the section where I call Ernst 12 General Rules of Sports Betting. I think it's Ernst 4 General Rules of Sports Betting. I also have a video online that I just posted on my Twitter account recently, which explains, look, these ATS records and trends are worthless, and you should give them zero value, and you should basically ignore anyone who's talking about them because they just don't get it.
No, absolutely, and that's great. Right there in the first chapter of your book, you kind of talk about that. What I think is important, because disclosing that, people do not understand. When I give out picks to premium subscribers to the Odds Breakers, a lot of these picks are made right when some of these lines went out, because that's when I try to hit it before it moves, and then the lines get a little bit stale in the middle of the week. And then at the very end, there's a bunch of money that comes in that the books will sometimes adjust just to balance the book, which might be a bad number that you can either come back on if it's the same game, if it moves from like 4 down to 2, or you just find value in another game that you didn't like when it opened, but all of a sudden it kind of moved more your way and it made more of it a bet. So I think that's a fantastic way of talking about it. That now, especially with apps out there, you don't have to wait till you go to the casino to watch the game on Saturday. You can place the bet before, and your ATS record might be completely different than somebody else's ATS record, even if you bet on the same side of every single game. It just completely depends when.
I have a long explanation in my book that goes into it. I even provided a little dialogue where I had a fictional guy speaking to another sports bettor, walking through the process of explaining why the ATS records don't have any value. It's simply because the measurement point is constantly changing, and you're using a set of data that's not applicable to you. You can't bet those numbers.
Yeah, absolutely, and I completely agree with that. And a lot of people, these trend bettors, like you're saying, and everything, they're also relying on past information. And sure, you're always going to have that Milwaukee Bucks team that is at 65% against the spread, as a favorite or whatever. You're always going to have that every year, and it's usually going to be a different team because the books have to catch up to it. But then there's the outliers, and people think they need to jump on trends, and those are already in the past.
The people who are basing their betting on ATS records and trends, I honestly just feel sorry for them, because they would literally be better off just flipping a coin.
And you know what? That makes the line sometimes better for you and I when people are completely basing off them. So they can keep doing what they're doing. And if there's not a good reason or system behind this, meaning like literally some football player has some quarterback cannot play at for example Lambeau Field, he just can't mentally play there, and you can literally find that.
That's the kind of factual information that's valuable,
right?
Especially saying in college football, if you have a quarterback who grew up in Southern California and plays at a school where it's in a warm weather climate, and then he travels up to Michigan for a game and it's just brutally cold, or he's playing outdoors somewhere back east and it's brutally cold.
That's a system.
How's that going to affect him?
Yeah, that's a system.
There's no math model that's going to find that information.
Right, and that's a system play more than a trend play as well. So 100% agree with you on that. But at the same time, you got all this information. You get it in the book. Now you're writing. Now you're writing another book, man. Are you an author? Did you get a degree in journalism, or what would you do?
No, basically, I'm. The easiest way to answer this, and I don't intend to sound flippant or arrogant or anything, is I'm just very different than other people. A few years ago, I don't really want to get into details, but a few years ago, I took an IQ test, and I scored so high that the proctor came back and said, I think there's an error, take it again, and then came back a third time and said, I think there's another error, take it again. And the answer was that I had scored so high that they couldn't even scale my intelligence. And the person said, I don't understand why I've never heard of you, why you're not, at MIT or this, that, and the other. And then I explained about the traumatic events that happened in my life, threw my life off course. So the simple answer is that I'm an incredibly intellectual person that enjoys intellectual challenges. And my recent activity now is I've started enjoying writing and publishing books. And so that's, I'm glad I found a way to publish them, because I thought that I would have to go find a publisher and sell my book to them and blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, I'm never going to get anything published because it's a gatekeeper system. I need to find a publisher who's willing to publish my book. But I found a way around the gatekeeper system, and that's through the Amazon program, where I just upload my book and promote it myself, and I get the royalties. So now the sky's the limit for me. I have plans on writing books well beyond just sports betting. I'm a CPA, so I'm going to write some accounting and tax books, and I have some books on politics that I'm interested in writing. But I don't have any interest in writing any fiction books. Fiction's not really an area that interests me as a writer, but I have a lot of books, nonfiction, that I'm very interested in writing, and I enjoy it. It's fun for me.
Well, I'll tell you this: I would hate to read a fiction book by any CPA in America or anywhere.
I actually read a pretty interesting one written by a CPA when I was traveling through Europe. I was sitting in the Greek islands, just relaxing, having a great old time, and I read a book written about a guy that got involved in what's called vulture funds, where they basically just prey on companies that are failing and split them up, basically like Gordon Gekko type stuff.
Right.
And it was a fiction book written by a CPA that was actually pretty interesting to read. And I breezed through it on an afternoon on an island in Greece called Ios. It's spelled IOS. It's an awesome place. If anybody's ever going to travel to Europe, you need to go to this place called Ios. I actually did read one book, fiction written by a CPA, that turned out to be pretty interesting.
Well, I'll tell you, the percentages can't be that high in your favor for
fiction
books.
I found the needle in the haystack. I would not, and I have no. I know that if I tried to write fiction, it would probably turn out pretty poor, so I'm not even going to attempt it.
I don't think anyone's looking for sports betting advice from fictional writers either, man. You're a numbers guy, and it would
kind of contradict your credibility.
I think so. It's like this guy's out here daydreaming when he's supposed to be telling me what I'm supposed to be doing here.
He's making stuff up.
Well, that's fantastic, man. Do you have a business side of sports betting that like people can play your plays? Or
so about, I guess probably about 3 years ago, I started doing it alone, offering my plays, and I got so frustrated with people falsely accusing me of being dishonest, and I had an actual real career. I said they're tarnishing my good reputation. I can't have this, so I just stopped cold turkey. I said I can't have this because they're tarnishing my reputation with all these false accusations of dishonesty, and so I shut it down. Then when I moved to Las Vegas, I said, well, you know what? Maybe if I record videos and make it, be very transparent with people about my educational background, my work experience, this, that, and the other. I see selling plays as no different than being a stockbroker. You're just selling advice, right? Mm-hmm. I hear people complaining about people selling plays, and I say, look, if you're competent and honest, there's nothing wrong with it.
Right.
And number one, being honest. If you're just honest about your record and your performance and the people that you work with, there's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly fine.
Right.
And so last season, I briefly started doing it, but the people that I were working with were unreliable, and I couldn't, every single week I'm pulling teeth trying to get the plays from them. And I just said, forget it. This is just not working. This season, I have a few people that I feel confident can get me through the whole season. Because again, something that I preach is time management.